What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today what I want to talk about is finesse worms. It's one of America's favorite soft plastics, whether you're a beginner fishing ponds or whether you're Kevin Van Dam out there fishing at the highest level. They play in every aspect. And so today what I want to do is I want to talk about how I rig them for the springtime, how you can catch more fish with them, and some of the off-the-wall ways that I rig them to cover water with a finesse worm in ways you probably wouldn't have thought about. So stick around, you guys are not going to want to miss this video. So for today's video, I'm going to talk about two different style worms. I have your trick worm style worm, which literally, if you look at this is a Z-Man finesse worm, that Elastec that we all love, but it looks just like a trick worm. So if you're a Zoom guy, if you're a Yamamoto guy, we're just talking about finesse worms. We have a trick worm style, and then we have your true finesse style worm, right? This is your straight tail worm. This is gonna be your robo worm category. This is a Z-Man SMH worm, again, but it has that smooth, really thin, kind of not in your face style worm, versus this is a little bit bulkier and a little bit bigger. But these are the two worms that we're going to talk about today. So why am I talking about finesse worms right now? I'm talking about them because we're going to have the biggest population of fish shallow that we're going to have for the entire year now. Whether you're in Florida and you have post-spawn fish or spawning fish, or whether you're up north, your fish are just starting to get warmed up. They're just starting to come shallow. We're in Virginia right here, so I figured this was a good middle of the road area where I could talk about a little bit of everything. If you're in North Carolina and lower right now, your fish are gonna start spawning. If you're Virginia and higher, your fish are either just starting to get warmed up and getting close to that, or they haven't even thought about it yet and they're still working shallow. But there's no better way to catch fish when they're shallow than finesse worms. Probably because you can rig them about every way possible, whether you are wacky rigging them, Nico rigging them, or just putting them on a floating worm style rig where you just have them Texas rigged and are working them through the brush. We're gonna talk about all of that today, just so that you guys can have a better idea as to how to rig some of these worms to get more bites and to be more efficient with a worm. So with the trick worm style, there's a few different ways that I like to rig it for right now. If you are fishing shallow cover, target style fishing, you can wacky rig it or Nico rig it. That's pretty basic, right? If you guys haven't seen that before, I do an entire wacky rig breakdown. I'll have that in the video description somewhere for you guys to check out, or you can go back on the channel and look for it. But you can also do a couple of different things with it. You know, most people think about shallow fishing a worm as wacky rigging or Nico rigging only, but you can also Texas rig a worm and do what they call like a floating style worm, which almost does the exact same thing that a fluke does. So you can still cast it up and twitch it, and a worm actually does a lot of the same things that a fluke is gonna do. It has a lot of hunting action, it has a lot of crazy movement, and if you're using a Z-Man worm, it's gonna float and it's gonna be kind of cumbersome for that. But if you use like a trick worm or a Zoom trick worm or a Yamamoto style worm, it'll actually sink, and so you can get that same fluke-like action out of it. And you rig it the exact same way as a fluke. So you just Texas rig it, and then you can skip it way up into cover without having to worry about it getting stuck, and you get some crazy action with it when you pull it, which is super fun, because when those fish are shallow, you can get a ton of really awesome bites on it. But if you're a guy where your fish haven't quite warmed up yet to getting super shallow, or they're in that transition phase, there's a couple different ways that I'm gonna rig this. The first of which is going to be a shaky head. But I like to go with an 1/8 ounce shaky head. This is a Trocar tungsten shaky head. Get them now because they're going out of stock, unfortunately. But that's a great way to cover a ton of water, and I like pairing that with the Z-Man plastics because it floats. And so to rig a shaky head, super simple. All I'm gonna do is Texas rig it up on here just like this. So now you have a shaky head. But what that's gonna do is that's gonna skip super well up under docks, up under cover. You can fish offshore rock piles with it, etc. And it's gonna have a cool fall rate when it sinks. And again, that Z-Man's gonna allow it to stand up a little bit better, which is gonna make for some cool movement under the water. The other way that I really like to rig a worm that most people don't anymore, and it's gonna be a really sweet one if you're covering water with a worm, it's going to be on a swing head. That's something that most people don't ever try anymore. And so when you rig a swing head worm up, you just Texas rig it like you normally would, right? This is just a Trocar swing head. So we have it just Texas rigged like so. But now if you look at how that worm moves, see how much more action that worm is gonna have out of it? And so as you're pulling it along the bottom, that worm is gonna be back there darting and dancing. And again, this is a Z-Man worm, so it's gonna kind of wanna float up a little bit more, even though you have a little bit bigger hook on here. But that's gonna allow me to cover a lot more water with a worm than ever before, right? Now, if I'm fishing a shallow point that's a really long tapering point that most people would really crank or just throw a jerkbait over it, now you can get that same finesse style profile with a worm that you like, but you can cover it way faster. So the way I would work this worm on a swing head is I would cast it out and drag it, or you can reel it real slow, but as soon as I hit something that is out of the ordinary, whether it be a stump, whether it be a log, a rock, a big rock, you know, I'm gonna pause it, because then that's a target that those fish are gonna wanna sit around. So as I pause that, now I can sit there and kind of shake that worm and hop it, and that worm's gonna be down there just kind of moving around real slowly. That works great for clear water situations. If you live on a rocky lake, or if you live on a very offshore popular lake that has a ton of offshore stumps, a ton of flats that have a lot of cover on it, and you're not a forward-facing sonar guy, this is a great way to cover that water. Just dragging a worm out the back. And that is going to be my favorite offshore rig for this, because they make this in 1/4 all the way up to like 1 ounce. Mustad even makes one where you can have a little screw lock on it, and you can put your favorite hook on there for whatever type of swing head that you want to use. So that's another good one. I'll have that link down below as well as all the gear that I like to throw this type of stuff on. So now we'll talk about the actual true finesse worm. This is going to be one that I only do a couple different things with. I really love to throw this finesse worm on a drop shot and a shaky head. And you might ask why that is, and it's because of how the design of the worm is. It has one thicker side and one real thin side. If you look at the trick worm style worm, it's all kind of one shape. So when it falls, it's gonna fall uniformly, and when you move it through the water, there's gonna be kind of the same uniform movement throughout that whole worm. Versus this finesse style worm, this SMH worm, this is your body of the worm and this is your thin tail. Most of your action is going to come in the tail. And so that leads me to rig it a couple different ways. The first of which is gonna be a shaky head. That worm rides extremely well on a shaky head because, again, if you throw it on an 1/8 ounce shaky head, that worm likes to float up, and as I shake it, that tail gets a ton of crazy action. So if I'm fishing targets, or if I'm really fishing shallow with it where I'm skipping it up under docks, that's a great option because you can get a lot more movement out of that worm without having to move it really far. Now the other way that I like to rig that is going to be with a drop shot. And so this Trocar finesse hook, I can't remember the name of it, it's a finesse worm hook, I'll have it linked down below. My favorite hook for this, but when you rig it on a drop shot like this, you can either A, nose rig it, or you can B, Texas rig it like so. Now you have another way that you can pitch that worm up there and fish it in place. And that's gonna be huge this time of year because, as we know, when these fish start to stage up, they like to get on something, whether it be a hard spot, a piece of cover, a dock pole, etc. And those fish get really used to people fishing fast because everybody wants to go down the water or down the bank, throwing a crankbait, a swim jig, a chatterbait, something like that. So now when you get to those places that are high percentage areas, you can throw some of these finesse baits and really sit there and shake them in place. And this finesse worm is probably the best at that because it's a very non-intrusive bait. And when I say non-intrusive, I mean a bait that doesn't have a big presence in the water. When you're looking at this bait in the water, it's not rattling, it's not really vibrating a whole lot, but it does have a lot of movement that those fish can see, and they can feel it when they get closer, but it almost sneaks up on them. And so that is gonna be one of my absolute favorite worms to throw on a drop shot because you can just catch a ton of fish with it, especially with it being Z-Man Elastec. But that's a great option for when those fish are up there and you're in a pressured area. You know, we see Brandon Polnick do it time and time again, where he's throwing a drop shot in places that you never expect to throw a drop shot. When you get into water that's like 6 foot or less, people tend to write it off because it's typically known as a deep water bait, but it is a phenomenal shallow bait, especially this time of year when those fish are getting on those key pieces of isolated cover. This is gonna be the time to throw that because a lot of times the bites you get on moving baits this time of year are when those fish are sitting on pieces of cover, but as you get closer to the spawn, they're not gonna eat those moving baits as well, and so you have to start to slow down, and this is a great option for that. So hopefully this finesse worm video kind of helps you guys understand how to rig a finesse worm and how to go about fishing it a little bit. I'll have all the gear linked down below as always, but thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked today's video, hit that subscribe button, but God bless every single one of you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.